says 3D scanning of Matisse, back 1 through 4, one thing after another. And today we have Linda Zeicherman and Joe Nicola. Linda studied at the Conservation Center at the Metropolitan Museum. Oh, okay. Sorry. Linda joined the Sculpture Conservation Laboratory at the Museum of Modern Art in 1984. She has researched a wide variety of topics, including minimalist sculpture, sculpture utilizing electric lights, Fluxus, and Brancusi's bronze sculptures. Joe graduated from Bullock College in 1996 with a Bachelor in Art degree in Anthropology. Before joining Direct Dimensions earlier this year, Joe worked all around the Southwest U.S. On archaeology digs for the Navajo Nation, worked on stabilizing ruin stabilization crew for the National Park Service. I'll turn them over for their talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Henri Matisse sculpted these bas-reliefs, back 1 through back 4, from 1908 to 1931, a span of more than 2 decades. In them, we can see him develop some of the formal aspects of modern sculpture, as well as his own personal vision. He moves from something relatively naturalistic in the first, to volume changes slightly less naturalistic in the second, to geometric abstraction, and finally, at the end, what we would all recognize as full abstraction. Today, these are considered among the most important monuments of modern sculpture. However, they were practically invisible until the 50s. Only back 1 was exhibited as a plaster shortly after it was finished in 1912 and in 1913. 4 decades later, in 1948, Matisse was rich enough to have a bronze cast of number 1, and he showed it at an exhibition. After that, nothing until the 50s. This photo, taken in MoMA's Sculpture Garden, gives you an idea of the scale of these massive reliefs. But even better is this shot. This is Sotheby's chairman, David Norman, somewhat over-enthusiastically discussing back 1, part of a set that was sold at auction last year. Each back is over 6 feet high and a little wider than 4 feet. And they weigh, at least MoMA's set, anywhere between 300 and 800 pounds, depending on the foundry and the alloy. In preparation for an exhibition and catalog in cooperation between the Museum of Modern Art and the Art Institute of Chicago, the art historians and conservators wanted to know as much as possible about the making of the back. Technical examination and close examination were brought to bear at the MoMA lab. Some of the questions we had were, in what material were the backs originally sculpted? How did Matisse do it? What were his working methods? And finally, are the backs physically sequential? The reason that's important is because back number 2 was not discovered until 1954, after Matisse's death. And when it was first brought out as a plaster, the art historians actually weren't sure where its placement was in the sequence. The story of the backs begins here in Matisse's studio and sculpture school in Sacré-Cœur, Couvent du Sacré-Cœur. This photo was taken around 1909. Matisse is on the right, the fellow with the beard and the long smock. All the items for sculpting in clay are present, which is the sculptor's stand, and beneath it, a bowl containing water and a cloth, which was draped over the sculpture to keep it moist when it wasn't being worked on. This photo shows small-scale items, but Matisse had something much, much larger in mind, an over life-size bas-relief. He began this back, the largest sculpture he ever made, in spring 1908 in that studio in Paris that I showed you. And he worked on it for over a year, till June 1909. He prepared to move to a new studio in the suburbs of Paris, and he had the clay relief cast in plaster because he was afraid that it wouldn't survive the move. Making a plaster cast of clay destroys the clay, And so this photo is the only extant evidence of the first iteration of the back, now usually called back zero. Matisse's working method was typical for the creation of large clay reliefs. On large wooden boards, he hammered large headed nails. And if you look on the left side and you see small circles, that's what those are. He rolled out sheets of clay and pressed them on the board, and then created the entire image. And those nails are not only evident in this photo of the clay, but even later on in the plasters that were made from it and the bronze casts that came after that. So this sort of makes the sequence clear. Back zero in clay on the left to preserve it. When he moved his studio, he had it cast in plaster, which destroyed the original clay. Since we have plasters and bronzes of backs 1 through 4, why is there no plaster of back 0 and a subsequent bronze cast? The answer is because Matisse worked directly on that plaster of back 0 and irrevocably transformed it into back 1, which is what you see on the right side. My opinion is that he regretted not having a record of back 0, and from now on, he had 2 casts made when he decided he was finished with his state. One he kept in the warehouse, and one he kept to work on further. 4 decades later, that plaster of back 1 was turned into the bronze, and his work pattern is set. Matisse worked on the reliefs in plaster and not clay. He added fresh plaster to the surface of the cast and then sculpted it with chisels, hammers, rasps, and so on. The stored plaster version of each state of the previous state is what we have, and that's why we have the 4 next iterations. A few of the background features from clay back 0 are actually preserved through the reworked plaster of back 1 and subsequently into the bronze, which is what you see on the screen on the right. The ones you can most easily see, and I think the room is not quite dark enough, the lower left-hand corner is the signature Henri Matisse. On both of those, you can see the nail heads. Representing the nails that were hammered into the wooden support. And there is this odd little rectangular plate which is also a persistent feature. Besides features that were easy to see in close observation, we wanted more. And so we thought 3D scanning was the way to get it. We wanted a detailed view of the surface features, the ability to superimpose one back over the other to observe changes in the form, and measurements of the relative depths of the sculpture. So now we get into the more technical thing, and I'm going to hand it over to Joe.
Okay, so this slide here, this is Glenn Woodburn from Direct Dimensions. So he's spraying the sculptures, which are in bronze, with developer, which is essentially just talc suspended in alcohol. And we decided that it was going to be okay to do that to these sculptures because they are displayed outside, so they already have been worn a little bit in. We have come up with other methods that are a little less chemical, but given what we wanted for resolution, we decided that it would be okay to use developer on these.
Yeah, let me just say that they're very, very heavily waxed because they are outside. So I knew that I could get this off, and indeed it all came off perfectly well.
Okay, here are the sculptures all sprayed prior to scanning. For this project, we chose to use a ferro arm with an LDI scanner attachment. You can see the setup there on the right with the wheeled dolly. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the scanning arm, once it's calibrated, the arm creates a virtual space, a virtual coordinate system. Each elbow of the arm you see there has an optical encoder that relays the position of the probe at the end of the arm. Or in this case, when you attach the laser scanner, it relays the position of that laser scanner. So your laser scanner is being operated from the end of this arm. So it greatly increases the range, allows you to move around an object. So the accuracy you can see here is listed as 0.057 millimeters. So That's under ideal conditions, obviously, which none of us ever work in. The on-site scanning took about 2 days. Yep. So we captured the scans at 0.5 millimeter resolution over the course of 2 days. So here are the scans registered into a local system. This was done on site for all of the backs to make sure that we got all the data we needed to complete the project. So once all the scans were taken, it was taken back to our office, and all of them were meshed to a watertight model. And here you can see all 4 of them. They're all meshed at sub-millimeter resolution, and at this point they were ready to be inspected.
So the first feature is a detailed view of the surface features. So here again is back 1 in bronze, and it's artificially colored and artificially lit grayscale, and back 2. And I think you can all see that it's actually much easier to see the figure against the background in these artificially created scans than it is in person. They're very black, they're very shiny, and they're very outdoors. When you compare the 2 scans, you can magnify areas to study the surface more closely. And where the red arrows are points out details that are preserved between back 1 and back 2. And keep in mind that when I'm looking at those bronzes and the scans of those bronzes, I'm actually mentally looking at the plaster casts that Matisse sculpted, not the cast bronzes. I mean, that's what I'm looking at, but I'm looking behind it to see the plaster that he made. The molds and scans that Matisse used to preserve the current version and give him the second version to work on transferred and preserved very small details from the previous version. So 2 areas in this comparison are in the curve of the left wrist. You see the parallel striations of the finger marks. They're identical in back 1 and back 2. And the shape and details of the hand and thumb are also identical. So you can see how skilled the mold makers and bronze casters actually are, in that the molds made from the plasters that Matisse actually sculpted picked up the incredible number of details that went through 2 iterations and come down to us as the bronzes. To further prove the sequencing of the backs from previous states of the plaster reliefs, we can also look at the upper right-hand corner of backs 1, 2, and 3. So in back 1 and 2, which I've pointed out with the blue arrows, you can see the same V-shaped hollow. New to back 2 are the chiseled diagonal lines in the upper right-hand corner, which repeat only in back 3 and are gone by back 4. Note the tiny casting details that also appear in 2 and 3. Crenellations, pits, raised areas. These are the result of molding and casting and cannot be duplicated by carving. Secondly, the ability to superimpose one back over the other to see changes in the form.
The matching details that Linda was pointing out to you there, in addition to all of these here on the list, they came in handy for the registration as well. This list was used to point us in the right direction of matching areas between each version of back. So we'll point out a few of them right here. So what we did was, using the registration software, we registered 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4, using these areas that we believe had congruence between the 2 versions, and then ignoring all of the other data. Anything that was unique to the individual back was excluded for our registration purposes. So there you see the signature in back 1 and 2. And then between back 2 and 3, you have those striations that she was pointing out in the upper right corner. And here between 3 and 4, the right plane, well, right, yeah, as you're looking at it, of the hand remain the same between 3 and 4.
Actually, the only detail between 3 and 4 that are the same is the small tiny triangle, that's the one here, is the same, and there's
we moved that, yeah. So you can read that.
Okay. Once all the versions were aligned in the same coordinate system, we were able to track the progression of form and the metric geometry of change. Each back is assigned a color, as you may have guessed already. Blue is 1, 2 is yellow, 3 is red, 4 is purple. But I'm going to concentrate on 1 and 2 in the interest of time. We selected a few horizontal and vertical cross-section lines for direct comparison. The line I'm looking at is marked by the red arrow. It's 8 centimeters from the left edge. And it is, the feature I'm looking at is the background only. You can see that the background contour is nearly identical in number 1 and number 2, the blue and the yellow. There is a small difference at the bottom ledge, which could be the result of a casting deformation or post-casting handwork. If you move on to the figure, again, the red arrow on the small image on the upper left shows you where I'm at. And what I'm looking at is the left index finger on top of the head, down through the hair, the left shoulder blade, the left buttock, and the left calf. You begin to see changes between 1 and 2. Material was added to the top edge over the hand, and a great deal of material is added to the upper back. The rounded left buttock has been sliced off, and the upper thigh is trimmed and flattened. At the same time, material was added over the left thigh and calf, so that's the yellow line representing back 2 is higher or closer to the scanner than the blue of back 1. The bottom ledge still appears untouched. If you do the same thing as a horizontal cross-section, the features here are the left background, the left standing leg, the bent right leg, and the right background. Again, the side edges and backgrounds are nearly identical in surface contour, but the differences are that the legs have been widened, and certainly on the standing left leg, a large hunk has been chopped off. What I don't know is whether Matisse sort of covered the whole leg over and then chopped off, then recarved, or whether he cut off that slice of the left leg. Beforehand. I tend to think he made it larger and then went and carved it over. And perhaps more striking is this area of the left background through the figure at the shoulder level to the right background. And the backgrounds, of course, are similar again, but large differences in the figure show you that the entire scapula and neck area have been covered with a thick layer of plaster to create that smoother, more abstract form of back 2. Third, laser scanning gave us the ability to measure the relative depths of the sculpture using an inspection program. So we're going to find out not only where Matisse made changes, but by how much. Here we're comparing back 1 to back 2, and the scale in this view is plus or minus 1 inch. Green means that areas on 1 and 2 are nearly identical in their distance from the scanner, up to 1 inch. Gray areas have a difference of greater than 1 inch. We notice that Matisse added to the figure heavily, but left the background pretty much alone. Variations in the background have to do partially with sculpting and also with waviness in the cast, because when you cast a large 6 foot by 4 foot thing like this, you do develop waviness in the bronze. Where you see blue, it means that back 1 is up to 1 inch lower than back 2, and where you see red, it means that back 1 is up to 1 inch higher. If you change the scale to plus or minus 4 inches, different information appears. Again, green means that 1 and 2 on this scale have less than a 4-inch difference. Well, no surprise. And gray areas indicate a difference of greater than 4 inches. For example, the standing left leg and the breast on top of the breast on the left are completely new in back 2. And where you see blue, it means that back 1 is 4 inches lower than back 2, and where you see red, it means that back 1 is 4 inches higher. And there again on the left buttock, we know that he sliced that off, and this is further proof. If you superimpose all 4 backs, you can see where and how the figure changed over 2 decades. It became wider and it became flatter. Much of the background was preserved all through the series. laser scanning does confirm that the Matisse back 1 through 4 are indeed one thing after another.